So good morning, everyone. Again, thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate that you're spending your time with us to give us your input and feedback here for our first of a number of Dare UK stakeholder workshops, and this first one being around the theme of demonstrating trustworthiness, which is fundamental to what we're doing here at Dare UK. So I think what I'm going to do, we're going to start the day by sort of just giving sort of a brief introduction to Dare UK. Perhaps for some people that's already known, but I think that's something that we should definitely do. So we'll hand over to Hans-Erik to give a quick introduction to the program. Hans-Erik is the program director, and then we'll jump straight into the work, so to speak, and really looking forward to getting a lot of input from you. This is really us trying to introduce our early thinking around the recommendations we're trying to put together. So it's very much a discussion with you. We're looking for feedback. We want constructive feedback and good discussion. So very much looking forward to that. Okay, I think then without further ado, Hans-Erik, I'll hand it over to you, and you can take us away.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Hans-Erik Aronson. I'm the director of Dare UK Phase 1. And I'm going to ask Fergus to share his screen to bring up the presentation I'm giving.
I am attempting. I hope it's working. Is it working?
Yeah, you don't have it in presentation mode, but
I will throw it in. There we go.
Try that. Okay, that's a little easier for you to see. All right, so we're Dare UK, stands for Data and Analytics Research Environment. We are a pan-UKRI initiative. If you were to go to the next slide, Fergus. So the UKRI is the biggest research funding organization in the UK. Public research organization, at least, and we are covering all of UKRI's ground. That's basically 9 entities, 7 councils, and 2 other entities that this represents. It's a wide array of research in the UK. Data has been fundamental to the UK's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as the UK moves out of the critical phase and into recovery, there is a need to ensure that investments being made in data research infrastructure are joined up, demonstrates trustworthiness, and support research at scale for public good. This is really why the Dare UK program was initiated and funded by UKRI. The program, Phase 1, is being executed by Health Data Research UK and Administrative Data Research UK jointly. Next slide, please. So why do we do this? The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that we need efficient access to data in a timely way. Researchers are finding it difficult to access the relevant data. It takes too long, and especially when you look at data from multiple domains, getting permission to do so is very complicated today. It can be done, but it's tricky. So we're trying to streamline that. Now, data is sensitive, so it needs to be looked after, and people need to be comfortable with researchers accessing the data. This is principal public data that we're talking about. The third thing is that the current infrastructure is not properly joined up. It makes it laborious again to do research at scale and across domains. So we are trying to come up with a sort of a design for doing this in a more joined up fashion going forward. We need, of course, to balance this greater efficiency for researchers with trust and security, and to maximize both of those portions, those streams, if you wish. Next slide, please. So to do this, we need to standardize how this is done across the UK, while keeping data secure and making the access path smoother. And central to all of this is trustworthiness with the public. Next slide, please. You will hear about something called trusted research environments. These are basically the environments that hold data and where data is being analyzed. It's, if you wish, server farms that or large computer infrastructures that store and where you analyze, store data and where you analyze the data. The UK's network of TREs or trusted research environments need to be able to support fast and efficient sharing, linkage and analysis of sensitive data. Data quickly goes out of date. It's important that researchers are able to access the data in a timely way for the public benefit. TREs need to work in more joined up ways so that the benefits of data research can be maximized across the entire infrastructure and knowledge and capabilities shared. More standardized access and governance would maximize security, trustworthiness, and efficiency. And knowing that all those, holding and accessing data are following the same rules will keep data safer and maintain a more trustworthy system. Next slide, please. So, the public needs to know that their data is kept safe and their privacy maintained. They should be kept informed on how their data is being used and why. An important element of DARE UK's phase 1 is establishing what UK-wide processes and/or standards for transparency and public communications for data research should be. Government departments and public service providers need to know that the data that they have collected and are responsible for is kept safe and is not misused. It is therefore also important to understand the needs of the stakeholders so that they feel comfortable sharing their data with approved researchers. Properly understanding what is considered trustworthy and consistently operating in line with this is crucial. So our workshops with key stakeholders are part of DARE UK's phase 1, including the public, data collectors, researchers, and technologists. They are key for us understanding how the UK's data research infrastructure can operate in a trustworthy manner. Next slide, please. So the benefits of data research must outweigh the risks. Ensuring that security and governance processes in place are sufficient and trusted is therefore essential, and research must be focused on answering the most important questions. Involving the public is essential to this so that we properly understand society's most pressing needs and so that data is used in research which addresses them. Balancing data misuse with data misuse is an important balance to strike. Avoiding data misuse is crucial, but so is avoiding the misuse of data, which can also negatively impact lives. Data is hugely valuable research, which has huge potential to benefit society, and we therefore have a duty to make sure that this value is not lost. Ensuring data access and use is fast and efficient so that the public benefits can be realized in a timely way is critical. Maximizing the public benefit of data research means ensuring that findings are made public in a timely fashion and that they can drive research and research for public good quickly. Next slide, please. So again, this is DARE UK's phase 1, design and dialogue phase. It started in July of last year and ends at the end of August of this year. Fundamental to the DARE UK program is really ensuring that research is conducted for public good in a way that is secure, trustworthy, and protects sensitive information about individuals. This will be achieved through an inclusive and transparent community co-design exercise undertaken during phase 1. Competition for sprint exemplar projects will uncover and test early thinking around use cases and the governance, ethics, and technical feasibility required to deliver UK-wide data analytics research infrastructure, which is the goal of this exercise. This will enable the development of a plan and input to the design for data research infrastructure across the UK. Meanwhile, a series of workshops with researchers, technologists, and the public will explore views regarding the national data research infrastructure that is joined up, trustworthy, and supports research at scale for public good and what it should look like. The findings of Dare UK Phase 1 will inform a blueprint for a novel and innovative national data research infrastructure and shape the future of the program, with the delivery partners for subsequent phases determined through an open and transparent process. Next slide, please. So again, central to Phase 1 is public involvement and engagement, and it's embedded throughout the Dare UK program to inform our planning and delivery. And we're doing this all for public benefit. That is the lodestar of this effort. Next slide, please. We have recruited members of the public to sit on both the Dare UK program board and scientific and technical advisory group to provide valuable input into decision-making processes. We also have a public advisor who we consult on our day-to-day activities to ensure public involvement is embedded across all aspects of our work. We are running a public dialogue to get to the depth of public views regarding what a trusted and connected national data research infrastructure should look like. And a series of deliberative workshops, members of the public will be held, were held in January 2022 to explore issues related to data security, access and accreditation, trustworthiness, and more in the context of a national data research infrastructure. We have also worked with a consulting firm called Robbie. It's a research consultancy that's dedicated to making research accessible to everyone, to support us to make sure that opinions of a range of people from across different backgrounds, identities, and geographical regions within the UK are accounted for. They're also providing us with expert support to design and facilitation of those workshops and the analysis of the findings. Those findings will be published in the spring of 2022 and will be extremely valuable for informing our design for this blueprint that I mentioned and the future delivery of the DARE program. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hand over to Lizzie.
Sounds Eric. So I'll just share my screen now. So I'm now going to run through our current sort of draft recommendations relating to how trustworthiness can be better demonstrated in the way that sensitive data is used for research. So I'm Lizzie, I'm the Senior Communications and Engagement Manager for Dare UK Phase 1. So just as a quick reminder of the sort of mission statement, if you like, for Dare, Dare UK aims to design and deliver a national data research infrastructure that's joined up, demonstrates trustworthiness and supports research at scale for public good. So trustworthiness is really at the centre of this programme. It's a red thread that runs through everything else that we're trying to do. And this is really why we're here today, why this is our first workshop, to really work together to see what demonstrating trustworthiness means and how it can be done in a better way to really get the support of the public to raise awareness for what we're doing. So why is this focus on demonstrating trustworthiness? So we know that when making use of sensitive data in research, trust is crucial. We're talking about sensitive data about people, so people need to be able to trust that their data is being used safely and appropriately. And this phrase, demonstrating trustworthiness, has really become the widely used phrase, and it's now the accepted standard when it comes to discussions around trust, rather than attempts to build or to maintain trust. So the quote on the screen that you'll see is from Honora O'Neill, who's a philosopher, and this was from a 2013 TEDx talk that she made. So it reads, "Trust in the end is distinctive because it's given by other people. You can't rebuild what other people give you. We need to think much less about trust, much more about being trustworthy and how you give people adequate, useful and simple evidence that you're trustworthy." So an organisation could be, in general, relatively well trusted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting in a trustworthy way. Trust can take years or even decades to build, but when it's taken for granted, it can be lost instantly. So really, the focus needs to be on consistently demonstrating why you are trustworthy, rather than on any sort of building or maintenance of trust. So I'm now going to run through our draft recommendations, and just to reiterate, these are really a work in progress, and that's why we're here today. We want to get your views, we want to get your feedback on them, we want to work together to refine them, to find out from you what you think's looking good, what you think's missing, what you think's missing the mark. And these recommendations will go to UK research and innovation, but there are also recommendations for the whole sector on actions that can be taken forward to better demonstrate trustworthiness and really keep the public in this journey. And these recommendations are based on a few different things. So we had a landscape review, which we published last October, which looked at views on the way that the current system was working, and that involved interviews and workshops with stakeholders from across the sector. And really importantly, our public dialogue that Hans-Erik mentioned, that just concluded last week with our final workshop, and we've now got a report in production, and that involved 46 members of the public from across the 4 UK nations, really looking at what they thought about the data research infrastructure and how they felt it could be more trustworthy. And we've also looked at other recent reports and publications from across the sector and had many other conversations and discussions with stakeholders over the last 6 months or so. And our final report, which outlines these recommendations once they're in a kind of final state, will go into more detail about the basis for each of them. But today, for the interest of time, I'll talk around the context a bit, but mainly present the current drafts, and then we can discuss them in more detail to get your views from your own experience when we go into the breakout rooms. So our first recommendation, draft, just to reiterate, remember these are not in any way final, is proactive transparency. So public dialogue work, including Dare UK's own dialogue, which, as I mentioned, concluded last week, has consistently found that when it comes to data research, increased understanding leads to increased support. And in particular, participants of our dialogue felt very reassured by the security processes in place to protect their privacy. And they felt that this showed a really clear need for more proactive transparency to raise public awareness of data research processes. And transparency usually comes hand in hand when we talk about trust. But we're really suggesting that this needs to be much more proactive to raise awareness rather than rather than just putting information on websites for people who want to find it. It's really about reaching out and telling people what's happening to raise this awareness. So this should involve reaching out in an accessible and relatable way to different communities and groups. And this is to really ensure that a diverse and inclusive public is reached. And using different methods, not all groups in society can be reached by the same methods. Some people listen to the radio, others don't. Some people use social media, others don't. So it's really about using different methods and different messaging to reach people that's relatable and accessible to them. And information should really focus on 2 core things: the purpose of the research being undertaken, particularly the public benefit, and the security processes in place to protect data, because we've really found that these are the 2 most important messages that the public want to be hearing. So closely linked to this, our second recommendation is for a public information campaign to be conducted as a general awareness raising exercise. So it's clear from public dialogue work that members of the public in general do have a low existing awareness of how data is used for research, and particularly the security processes that are in place to protect their data. So we suggest that an ambitious public information campaign is needed, and this should be centrally coordinated and involve the necessary resources to raise general awareness about how sensitive data is used in research. It should bring data research into the mainstream via channels such as newspapers, television, social media, and it should involve, again, reaching out to different groups with accessible, relatable messaging to ensure that a diverse and inclusive public is reached. And it should also involve the development of consistent and accessible messaging more generally, so that we have definitions that can be adopted across the sector. So moving on to the third recommendation, we also suggest that data custodians should be taking up data use registers. And this is something that many custodians already do, but it's not all of them. It's not standard across the board, but we suggest that it should be. So it's clear that people don't only want to know the general processes around data research, but they also want to be able to find out about how their own data might have been used in research and for what purpose. So we suggest that data use registers should be adopted by all data custodians of all types of sensitive data as a key aspect of maintaining transparency in the use of this data. And these registers should include information about who has accessed what data, when and for what purpose, and they should be in a clear and accessible format and regularly updated as and when data access is granted. And they should then link back to research outputs and impact stories so that people can really see what this research has led to. Now moving on a bit to public involvement and engagement. So our fourth draft recommendation is that there should be a culture shift to better recognise the importance of public involvement and engagement. And that all those working across the sector, data custodians, technologists, researchers, and all others should fully acknowledge the crucial nature of public involvement and engagement. And DARE UK does cover all research sectors, and generally the health sector is a bit further ahead when it comes to public involvement and engagement. So it's really a need to better acknowledge the importance of this work across the entire research sector. So we suggest it should be embedded as a central component across the entire life cycle of data research. And again, talking about resourcing, it needs to be properly resourced so that it can happen in a meaningful way. And that should include, for example, dedicated funding as part of research grant applications, and dedicated members of staff within data research organisational structures as well. And researchers themselves should also be trained in public involvement and engagement. It shouldn't be a matter of having one person on the team who takes on this, but the whole team should see this as something that's embedded across the whole research life cycle. And in order for public engagement and involvement to be meaningful and not tokenistic, those members of the public who are involved need to be given the time to fully understand the issues, and those engaging with them need to take the time to properly document and address their interests and concerns as well. And finally, members of the public should be involved in decision-making processes, for example, on decision-making panels, funding or data access requests. And finally, nearly done, closely linked to the last recommendation, to really kind of enable this culture shift, we suggest that there could be an independent central coordinating function for public involvement and engagement with data research, either as a new entity or as an offshoot of a relevant existing body. So currently there are many definitions and views regarding what good public involvement and engagement in data research looks like. There isn't much of a consensus, and this may be having an impact on the quality and the meaningfulness of activities. There's no clear accepted standard really for what it should look like. And in addition, there's also a lack of a joined up approach across the sector, particularly when it comes to researching public attitudes. So it does mean that efforts are being duplicated. So this function should be responsible for leading the creation of a more standardized approach to public involvement with data research, refining and promoting definitions, principles and standards across the sector. It should also lead on better understanding and also documenting public attitudes towards the use of sensitive data in research. So this should involve a full audit of existing knowledge of public attitudes with a clear view of where the gaps lie, and also leading on public dialogue work in collaboration with relevant organisations to fill these gaps. It can also be a central point of information sharing and coordination for public involvement and engagement professionals to support organisations across the sector to collaborate towards shared goals and avoid this duplication of effort. And it should also, it could also involve, lead on developing and providing public involvement and engagement training resources for researchers, technologists and others working in the sector, and also maintaining a central store of examples of best practice as well. So that, those are our recommendations, and we will go into breakout rooms shortly to get your thoughts on those, but we just have a quick 5 minutes of clarifications. So very much sort of, if anything's unclear, we've got loads of time to discuss the issues further. So any sort of comments or thoughts that you have on how they're looking, please save those for your breakout rooms. But any clarifications that anybody has, if you'd like to raise your hand or drop those in the chat. Thank you.
So maybe just looking at the chat, Lizzie, I think the question from Sam relatedly, how is data in the Palantir side of the COVID-19 data store used? I mean, to be quite frank, I'm not sure if we would have an answer to that here, specifically regarding Palantir. So I don't think we can really answer that question, to be honest, Sam. And what happens to your comms plans when NHS England continue to refuse to answer that question? Again, to be frank, I'm not sure if we would have an answer to that question, Sam. I guess that's a discussion that we can potentially then have with NHSE if it comes around.
To clarify, if you're saying, oh, we should do lots of comms plans about how data is used, yes, I fully support doing that. But you can't say, oh, we'll only have a conversation about how we use data and we'll only pick these projects. You have to look at all of them. And building a bigger HDR empire is probably not a good way to go about that. But there has to be, if you want patient involvement and you want public information, you have to have patient involvement and you have to make information public, not just the bits you would like.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, and to be honest, Sam, I guess we're not saying different things there. I'm not sure with the empire building, that's certainly a discussion we can have in the breakout room as well. Again, that's nothing we've specified, right? I mean, we think there's a need, again, it's a draft recommendation and there's a need for more centralization here, we feel. That's not necessarily to say that it needs to be this organization or that, right? We would leave that up to UKRI, who these recommendations are going to decide, where that should be done and who's best to deliver it, to be honest. So we're not, this is I would say not empire building at all from our side.
And it's very much still, it's not, as Fergus says, it's not any particular organisation that we're suggesting, and that's very much to be determined by UKRI. Although DARE is based within HDI UK, we are independent of HDI UK. So it's not really related to HDI UK's wider strategic goals. It's quite separate from that. Any other questions in the chat? I can see there's a couple of comments that are more related to feedback. So somebody said, when we talk about centrally coordinated, do we mean UK central or central by each home nation? That's something we can discuss. What do people think would be best? Please do discuss that in your breakout rooms and give your thoughts on that. Blockchain technologies. I don't think I have the technological knowledge to comment on that. I don't know if anybody else wants to. Jerry?
Well, again, Lizzie, I would suggest we hold that one for whichever breakout room. I think we want to be using this to clarify any questions around the recommendations, but I really want us to be able to capture the discussion in the breakout rooms and to go to some more depth. So Sam, HDR UK and ADR UK are handling this first phase of the Dare UK program for UKRI. It's not a HDR UK program, it is a UKRI program, and subsequent phases might be done differently. So yes, the invitations did come from HDR UK email addresses, and I have a HDR UK email address, but I conceive of this as very much an independent program under UKRI. And if one of the things we think will be better moving forward is for that independence to be clearer, that would be a great point to raise in either this session or subsequent workshops.
Thank you, Jerry. And somebody's mentioned funding to support the recommendations. So yeah, that's very much for UKRI. So we will make in our recommendations any kind of suggestions for what type of funding might be relevant for each of these. And then yes, it's UKRI will be the ones to take that funding forward. And somebody has said, will there be mandation, or is this just about recommendations? It is recommendations, yeah.
Should I maybe chime in here also that we are, we'll formulate recommendations to UKRI. We will not be mandating anything from their side, right? I mean, this is not our remit here. We are producing recommendations for the funding body, not we don't have a wider way of mandating anything. And also I would say that our journey here is our goal is not to be prescriptive. It is to engage a community to find out what's really needed, both on the research and technology side, but also on the patient and public side.
Great, thank you, Hans-Erik. So we want to make sure that we really stick to time. So we're now going to move into our breakout rooms where we have plenty of time to discussion. So please do, you know, be open and share your views and feelings. Hi everyone, I think we might all be back now. So hopefully you had some good discussions in your groups. So I think now the facilitators are just going to spend a couple of minutes just feeding back the main points from their group, and then there should be a few minutes to perhaps discuss anything that came up in another group that didn't come up in yours, and just think about those kind of broad issues as a whole group. So if I pick on somebody first, Fergus, do you want to give some insight into what your group talked about?
Sure, I can do that. And thanks to the group. I know we got cut off there by the popping out into the main room again, but thanks for the discussion. So I'll try to capture the main points quickly. I think one thing that definitely came through consistently was sort of consistent language, and very often that sort of, I guess the messaging to some extent, or the language, needs to be consistent across the research communities, because it does lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations of what is actually meant. And also that needs to be, again, consistent. That was, I guess, the key word there. Just looking through the rest here, I think it's also one thing that was sort of mentioned was to be cognizant that this changes over time. So it's never sort of the snapshot today is not necessarily the snapshot in 6 months, and that's something to consider as well. An interesting idea as well, sort of around recommendation 2, which is the public information campaign, was let the public lead that campaign, which I thought was a very sort of an interesting idea, sort of basically have the public, I mean, in the lead more or less of how that campaign is sort of executed. So I thought that was a very interesting idea. Just looking through the rest, don't rush it. So especially, you know, these things need to be considered carefully and with due, let's say, time. So don't rush through things and do it right the first time. I know we're sort of very short on time. Looking at recommendation 5 as well, sort of this, I guess, centralized coordinating function. I mean, there was sort of the thought that there are models that exist, certainly maybe specifically in certain spaces more than others, for example, in health. But obviously, you know, it would be critical to sort of really consider how it's been done in the past and not try to recreate things. The big challenge, of course, being that it's if you're going to do something like that, it's going to be cross-sectoral, you know, so, and that's really the challenge. The scope is really huge. And then how would you manage that? I think that's basically it. I mean, there was a lot of emphasis on empowering the public, right, to basically make decisions on how things are done. And this came through quite consistently across a lot of the recommendations, the discussions about the recommendations. I think I'll probably leave it there. I hope, to my group, I hope I've more or less captured it, just scanning through. So I can probably pass the ball then, I think, I see Jerry's unmuting himself, so I'll give it to Jerry.
Yeah, so I'll start with actually picking up on one that Fergus just went through from his group. One of the things that came through from ours around this centralized coordination was thinking about whether it's tractable across disciplines, viewing that Dare UK is not just about health, so it has been tried and been a challenge. So pick those areas where you might be able to expand this out that may be more tractable, like education. But also one of the points that was made of, before we go into a sort of understanding data sort of central coordination, we need to think about what's been done previously from organizations such as understanding patient data. Look at what's worked well, look at what's not worked well. How do we make that sustainable, and to the extent it can be, given that somebody's funding it, independent? So before diving into this, look at what's been done before, the governance and the funding, and how you do this effectively. There was strong view coming through, going back to the centralized information campaign, that this was really important. It needed to be coordinated, it needed to be transparent, and it needs to be properly resourced to be effective. But also it needs to bear in mind the scope of what's within UKRI's sort of influence, because this will really only work if it isn't just within projects that fall under UKRI, but actually covers communications around how data is used and the benefits and risks around data, and that covers out to the data controllers that may sit as NHS and NHS equivalents in the devolved nations. So it needs to cover the whole remit. So that's a challenge for UKRI, because they only have part of that. Data use registers were seen as important, seen as something that should be pushed, but we're at an early stage with this, and we need to understand what's achievable as quick wins around data use registers and standardization approaches around this. And you can have a grand vision around an individual being able to go on and see, perhaps through the NHS app, where their data is being used. But actually we need to get initially to a stage one through some quick wins. And the other thing that came through in a number of the discussions was to be effective around these, we need to be providing support and training to the research community. So if we are expecting, as I think we should be, a shifting culture around public involvement and engagement to really support trustworthiness, then we need to be reaching out to our researchers and ensuring that they have the support and resources and training to really do this effectively. So I think there was a lot of things come through on the boards, but I think those captures some of the thoughts.
Great, thank you, Fergus and Jerry. I'll throw the ball to Michelle.
Hiya. A lot of similar messages that came through. So with regards to proactive transparency, one of the common threads that were identified was that we need to be actively reaching out. So using a range of methods, particularly to target those groups that are unheard or hard to reach, and using the right terminology and the reference to them. So thinking about the best methods to engage those key groups. With regards to the public information campaign, as Fergus said, consistency was identified as being key. So making sure the messaging is consistent across organizations so that that way understanding from the public can be established in a clear way. Data use registers, largely it was agreed that that would be useful. There were some concerns about whether there's longevity and the burden, how burdensome a data use register might be, and whether actually there's a different and better route that could be used to establish better outcomes. With the culture shift, there was questions around, is there enough time to establish that? A lot of time needs to be dedicated to allow that culture shift to be embedded, and the right resources need to be used to do that. And also that with researchers, often their time is limited. They have a lot of burdens, a lot of deadlines and things they need to work on. So unless they have the right motivations, they may be unable to dedicate the time needed to gain the training and experience to make sure that that culture shift is really embedded. So they need to have the right motivations there. With the central coordinator functions to recommendation 5, it's seen as ambitious, but definitely useful. And in order for it to be established, there needs to be a considerable amount of funding given towards it, and that funding will need to be sustainable because public opinions change, they evolve over time. So it'll be important to keep having those conversations to recruit the public in the right way in order to ensure that the recommendations and the standards that are set are always relevant to the needs of the public and the concerns of the public. Those are the main ideas that came out. Thanks.
Thank you. So over to Hans-Erik.
Okay, thank you. So we had a very well-informed group on our call. We covered a lot of ground. Just to mention a few things that perhaps have not been discussed with the others yet by the others. One thing that came up was the notion of a possible social contract, that if we have healthcare provided by a single payer, effectively like the NHS, that perhaps our data should be used for the greater good, and that should be an understanding that we have. It's just it was a concept that we discussed, and apparently in some societies this is more prevalent. Israel was brought up as an example of that. The other thing was to allow patients to confirm directly that their data is correct and allow them to correct it, I would imagine, in that regard as well. So they find that when they speak to their GP, if they enter the data incorrectly, they should be able to view the data and make sure that it is correct. That obviously would have repercussions on research downstream as well. So we would like the data to be correct from day one. One notion also was brought up that when we have a pension plan, we can pick and choose what fund we are investing in. For instance, we could say that we do not want our money to be invested in, for instance, tobacco companies. Could we have a similar way of controlling in some granular fashion what kind of research our data can be used for. We need to demonstrate time and again that data is being safeguarded by the data custodians and that it's being used appropriately. Trustworthiness can be gained and lost quickly. So it is an ongoing journey that was mentioned several times. One thing that also came up is we've had somewhat of a technical conversation that there's a challenge with de-identified data sets to, in a sense, it should be challenging to identify the individuals. If you want to backtrace that and allow to let an individual know that that we want to use your data for a particular purpose, and it's stored in the context of a de-identified data set, that in principle should not be possible. So you would need to do that upfront before you create these de-identified data sets and allow the users to sort of consent to go into certain data use cases. And I think I'll probably stop at that. We have a whole bunch of things in our Jamboard as well, but most things I think were covered. One thing that did come up is a challenge of identifying a particular individual across domains. So this is where you don't have a unique identifier for an individual across, say, administrative data and health data. This is something that we're aware of course, and it's a bit of a technical thing, but you can employ probabilistic methods to see which data points are from the same person across different data sets. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Eric. So I'll just move on to my group then. So everybody agreed that this proactive transparency is really important. There was a bit of discussion around at what point in the data journey that should be, and that perhaps previously there's been an over focus on the data use point, but this transparency should come much earlier around data linkage. So just really starting it right at the beginning of the data journey. We spoke also a bit about the importance of trust for data custodians. So being really clear about standardized approaches to protect data. So we spoke about 5 safes, and also about how if we have standards that are clearly supported by the public through public dialogue and involvement, that can also help data custodians or data collectors to feel comfortable with sharing their data, which can be beneficial for research as well. And I think we'll be covering that more in our incentives workshop on Thursday as well. In terms of a public information campaign, we spoke quite a bit about what a call to action would be for this. So what do we want people to actually do after learning about how data is being used, and who or what do we want them to feel more trust in? So getting a bit more specific, I guess, around what the more specific purpose of this campaign would be, and making sure it involves all sectors. So again, making sure it's not just focused on health. In terms of data use registers, yeah, everybody pretty much agreed that this was something that ought to happen, and thinking about how, I suppose, that can also be done proactively. People might not necessarily even know who has their data, so how would they know to then look for their data use register? So how to kind of increase awareness of who holds people's data, and therefore where they can find information about how their data is being used. And yeah, again, we spoke a bit about not thinking about the culture shift, as some other groups have said. We spoke about not trying to reinvent the wheel, so making sure we're learning from other existing bodies, like understanding patient data was mentioned, and Involve, and also how to kind of bring bring lessons from organisations that have focused specifically on one sector, so understanding patient data, focusing on health, how to bring that into all research sectors. And as some of the others have said, it's that kind of complication of linked data where it's actually involving multiple different types of data, how to approach that, and with different legislation covering those types of data as well. So I think I will stop there. I think those are the main, some of the main points, but obviously we've captured all of the discussions, so we'll be taking all of the different comments on board. So we just have a few minutes left really, so I guess I just wanted to open up to see if anybody from any of the other groups perhaps wanted to respond to any of the points raised in other groups that have just been mentioned now. Perhaps people have different views or they want to contribute something additional based on what they've just heard. So perhaps if you do, you want to raise a hand or drop something in the chat. Or anything that somebody feels like they didn't get a chance to say in their last, in their breakout room session. And if not, then I think we can just thank you all so much for your time. It's been really interesting hearing everybody's views. And so thank you so much for taking 2 hours out of your Tuesday morning. We have lots more workshops coming up on different topics. So if you haven't already, please do have a look at those and consider joining. And yeah, really looking forward to working more on these recommendations and sharing them at their next stage. So thank you all so much.